So I thought I'd make a video on some really disturbing information. Obviously, they're regurgitating all this other stuff. And this is about being raped by a transgender and the transgender sort of swarming me. So anyway, I don't know when this fame, I don't know when this attention or free houses that were given away. I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is going to be a primary focus on Richard Murphy, Jeremy Keene, Cisco, John Basili, those five, and Nick Herrera. They were all in my same grade. Anthony and Little John were all a grade below me. Because John Murphy and Anthony went to school in the same grade. And I was thinking, there used to be a girl by the name of Lakina Chin. And she was an Asian individual that, I hope this person wasn't a transgender, but I think this person was, and I didn't know. And the only reason I ended up being lured to her house was because of Jessica Saavedra, who one day after school, I went to her house to go, we were smoking weed, we were all walking, there's a bunch of kids, I don't know, 5, 6 of us, and I don't know how I ended up at her house. But I remember we were walking from school somehow, and we were smoking weed, and then we decided to go smoke weed at the park. I was in 7th, I was in 8th grade. I was 14 years old. And I recall going at 14 years old to this girl's house, Lakina Chin, and she was very thick. She was a very thick Asian girl, Cambodian. Her parents were like Cambodian, like she was half Cambodian, half Asian. I'm not sure exactly, but she looked kind of Korean. She spoke Cambodian, and I was thinking, if this person ends up being a transgender, which I'm really starting to think it is, Richard Murphy, John Basili, and Nick Herrera and Cisco are entirely responsible for not telling me and fooling me, especially Richard and Jeremy. Especially Jeremy more than anyone else. And Jeremy went to the military. And because I remember Jeremy was always influencing me to pursue Lakina Chin. And he never told me that Lakina Chin was a male. Because I remember coming home and I went to her house, and once I got to Jeremy's house later that night, he was, oh dude, you went to Lakina's, come on, let's talk in the room. Let's talk, like it was a dramatic, talk about whatever happened. And I got there and I, into his room, and he was in the living room watching TV. He's like, come on, just go to the room, let's talk. We gotta talk, I wanna know everything. But I go over to his room and I sit at the computer, sits at the bed. He goes, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? Did you do it with her or whatever? Being kids. I said, no, we just smoked weed. And I was thinking to myself, when I went to this girl's house, I was with Jessica Saavedra, who didn't know, I think was connected to Patricia Cadena. I went to her house, and when I went into the house, into Lakina Chin's house, it was a very small room, and one of the things that makes me think she was a female, or a male, was because her toenails were very thick, very, very thick, like not disinfected thick, but like almost like a lot of genes and nutrients that makes a person healthy. Like you can tell, it's why you're more likely to see it in blacks or very healthy, strong people, thicker skin, thicker nails, or stronger hair, more fulfilling. But it's uncommon for any female like that. And I thought, And I remember when this person, I remember, because it's crazy, because this transgender wore a lot of crazy dresses, a few crazy dresses that were unbelievably from top to bottom, like if you were going to an Oscars award or some shit. Went to school like that a few times, and everybody was staring, and I remember Aaron Mendoza saying, "Man, she has a nice pair of legs," and that was Aaron Mendoza saying that. He would have known. He would have known if she was a transgender, and I was around him as well. And when I was when I went to her house though, and I don't know, it was like toward the end of the year, sometime I think. And I used to talk to her over the phone, and one of the things she said, it was crazy. This person said is her dad was like a ghost psychic or some shit, and he used to capture bad spirits or ghosts in jars or some shit like that. And her dad was like Vietnamese, and Vietnamese people very strongly believe in like curses and spirits, like spirit entities. They're very into that more than Koreans, like where they do different types of medicines and situations of spirit hauntings. I've known that as well as Vietnamese people particularly, and I know they do this also because in the war, the Vietnam War, the Americans used satanic, evil screams on loudspeaker and would walk into the woods in Vietnam War as an experiment in large groups of experiment cases to scare the Vietnamese people, because they were absolutely terrified of that, of sort of the spiritual entities of what they think is to what their existence is. And it worked. But it was something that they used to do. Many years they used to get these guys wear backpacks, very heavy backpacks, and with these satanic screams and evil spirit screams, and they would walk through into the forest, and it would scare everyone. It would scare all the people, terrorize them, and it was a psychological thing they did in war to torment their enemy. So, anyway, I was talking about this because when I went to her house, I know she said her dad worked like 3 jobs, I think, and I never heard of her mother. I don't think she didn't say she had a mother. She said, "Oh yeah, I got a mom," or no, my parents divorced, and I think she said her parents got divorced. Her parents got divorced or something, or her mom died. I can't remember if her mom died or her parents got a divorce and she was living with her dad. But there was very little conversation she wanted to have to talk about her mother. But I remember walking into the house, the normal smell of Cambodian people's houses, it has a particular, the food that they make, right? And I go into the house, and me, Jessica Saavedra, and Lakina. And we're all pretty fucking high, don't have anything to do, and I think I'm sitting on the bed. Keena's sitting on a chair against the wall, along with, on the other side of the wall, Jessica Saavedra. We just all really fucking blazed and high, and start making conversations about dumb shit. And there was a girl that all of a sudden, as soon as I got into the house and room, within like 1 minute, there's a girl that shows up. And this girl's name is Claudia. Not the same Claudia where I had like a mistress when I was like in 8th grade and almost lost my virginity to her, but it looked just like Claudia. She had midnight black hair and very light skin and very thin. And when this girl Claudia came in, she was pretty. In fact, I was even more attracted to her, or even felt more of sort of, she was genuine at the moment I saw her. And she came into the room and she was trying to protect me from Lakina. And Lakina, across the street that she lived, I was told Before I knew going to her house or smoking weed with her, you know, she had lost her virginity to a guy that was black living right across the street. And she said, oh yeah, and I think Jessica Saavedra and someone else said that, oh, so there was a lot of information that was also saying this person wasn't gay or this person wasn't a transgender. That's what Jessica Saavedra said. And, but next door to Jessica, or one of the houses across the street, neighbors, whereas where this girl Claudia lived, and the reason she showed up is because she saw me. And I remember what pants she was wearing. She was wearing all white pants, and she was Mexican. She was real light complected, very light complected for a Mexican girl, with long black hair in like silk, and she was pretty. She was like her face was like very pretty. I remember her. Within 1 minute of me walking into that house, that girl showed up immediately. And I remember she just kind of, I didn't know who she was because I think she went to a different school or was like a grade, I don't know what grade she is. I think she went to a different school. And I didn't really think so much of it other than someone new being introduced. And I guess this was one of Lakina's friends that knew her, because this sort of girl talk. But when she sat in the room, she sat across from Lakina and like was like sort of like looked at me like this and went like this. And Lakina was like looking at her like, what's wrong? And this Mexican girl, her name was Claudia, and she showed up. So I thought it was important for me because I remember her very distinctively looking. I could tell when there was a female very interested in me because it was something that was very intuitive when I was very young, that I could tell whether the person was interested in me or not, had interest. And I could either tell because it was like, oh, Hector's cute, or I like him, and the sort of strong focus or a lot of attention I would maybe put a target onto them. And I remember looking at her, but I assumed that she probably had someone else in her life at that time. But when she came into the room, she immediately looked at Lakina, and she wasn't focused on me. She just looked at me and like she was protecting me. This is how the body language, the sort of quick glance at me, and she looked like this for a moment and stared at me, and then goes like this and looks at Lakina and goes, oh, huh? And they started to talk, and she was like, and she was in the room for about 4 minutes. I don't know what the conversation was between them. We're all in the room and no TV's on. And I don't know what the conversation was like. Oh, I'm talking to this, whatever. I don't remember what the conversation was. And somehow, I don't know what it was. She gets up and said, okay, well, I gotta leave. She goes, okay, well, I gotta leave. And I think that's what she said. And she walks out. But Lakina particularly didn't look at this girl like she was happy to be there. She looked like, what are you doing? You're ruining what my plan is. And that's exactly what this girl, I never met this girl. I'd never seen her before. I never met her, but I just knew she was a real pretty girl. But when she looked at me, she immediately looked at me, and she looked. And I don't know how, if she saw me on the side of the house. I don't know if she saw me walking. I never met her. But she went after Lakina, like looking at her, like looked at me very clearly, and then looked at him and looked at her, and and I don't remember what, but there was not a friendly conversation of like we were friends. It was Claudia 100% was like trying to let her like, don't victimize him. Like, you're not gonna victimize him. I swear to you, the whole body language, the conversation. But when she gets back and Lakina's walking her outside, she says, he goes, yeah, that's my girl Claudia. Yeah, she lives across the street. That's what she says, and that's how she expresses it. So when she expresses disappointment or something like that, that immediately indicates, I don't like you because you're showing up to correct things or to help protect something and ruin my own plan. But I never met this person. So I think a couple months go by, and I think it's the last day of the school year, and walking with Lakina, and I recall we're walking and we start talking. There's no one in the hallways. And Lakina was very persistent toward me. And somehow we end up in the basketball court, I think, and we're holding hands. And I'm trying to like arouse this person, right? And get them horny. And as we're walking, I think I'm holding her hand very close, not really close to me. And, you know, we're sort of kind of flirting, walking down the hall. There's really no one around in the school. And there's a couple students waiting at the very end of the DWEP period where everyone used to hang out at after school. And there's probably like 10 people there, spread out yard, on the patio, whatever, upstairs. And I recall, I was like, well, how do I get this girl horny or try to think that she wants my dick, right? Kids are always trying to figure out some sort of silly things we do, right? And I remember, I think I was instantly, when I was walking behind her, right? Because she was sort of guiding, I was walking behind her. I was walking, and I think I grabbed her hand, and I sort of brushed her against my dick for a moment, like I was interested in fucking. And I remember like kind of walking to the side, and she had her hand, and it was like just the surface knuckles of the hand. And we're walking like that, and then I walked to her side, and I saw her eyes go like this, kind of like wide, like, oh, I think he wants to, But she was pushing on to the flirting very much still. We stop at the end of the hall, and I ended up French kissing her very heavily on the last day of school. And then I said, okay, I gotta go. And then looked away very quiet and goes, gosh, you got a lot of saliva. I used to have a drooling problem when I was younger. I'd always overproduce saliva. And then I left and walked away, and as I'm walking out the door, I walk out, I see Aaron Mendoza, and he's like, I guess, spying. And I could see him far down there, and he kind of looks over me and goes, yeah, man, I saw you tongue her down, man. He goes, I saw you tongue her down. And, I think it's important for me to talk about, because you have no idea how much Jeremy, Richard, and John were involved in that. Because we always walked together, and they knew that I was talking to Lakina, and they knew, especially Jeremy Keene, especially Jeremy, because Jeremy was always asking me questions, like, did you go to her house? Yeah, Lakina looks fine. Like, yeah, man, Lakina, she's real firm, thick ass, and all this. I mean, I have no earthly idea this person was in any way. So I think it's important for me to talk about, to clarify the situation, because this is some of the troubling situation is when you have all these friends and these homosexuals, and they're sort of doing this. So when we get to high school and they figure out, oh wait, Hector's straight, oh we fooled Hector, oh guess what, let's split, let's take his money, let's use him, let's pretend we want him to go take it with the ranch and be his friend, and then we'll just ride the red carpet. Oh no, we got to do it because of the house, and go after his mother, because then they're going to take the house away from Kathy because she's getting all this free money in their house sitting. Oh, fuck you too. And then and then the multi-million-dollar BMW John Murphy got, and at Jack Murphy's body shop, which really wasn't even his. So all these things is just for using me for resources and fooling me. What can I take and steal from you and fool you like a dumbass? That's really what it is. But there's already so much investment as a real good true friendship that then they sever that at very early, when I was about late 8th grade. And Richard knew this. If Richard knew she was a transgender, Richard fucking knew this. And so they just sort of keep going. I didn't know anything, and nobody ever told me. And one of the things I want to talk about also, that I think that may be also a transgender, is Edward's sister, Edward Rangel, who has an identical twin. I know he got killed with Robert, yada yada, a long time ago, I understand. Well, he had a sister named Brenda. I think her name was Brenda, but she was very tall and had real big tits. One day, I was at the apartments, and I was at Edward's apartment complex, and she used to just walk by eating Cheetos all the time. And she always ate flaming hot Cheetos all the time. She didn't ever show really any interest in me. She never did. She never really did. That's the truth. She never really showed very much interest in me. And I thought, I was like, wow, she had really big tits. Like, she had fully developed, round, big tits for someone her age and size. And she was tall. She was my height. And always used to wear lipstick. And she kind of looked like a Chicana girl a little bit. But I particularly didn't find her all that comfortable. But she had big tits. You know, when you're like 14 years old, 15 years old, you see a girl with big, round, full tits. You know, it's like an orgasm, right? You know, but one day I was at the apartment sitting on the chair, sitting on the stairs, and Edward, I don't know if he was outside or not, or he went inside to use the restroom or wait on Marco. Way down, straight ahead, like 40 yards, there's a big draftway of where people walk, right? But it's in between the apartments. It's not in the parking lot. It's not a sidewalk. It's like a very wide sidewalk. And then it's just walking through the apartments. And at the very, very end, I saw this guy named Jesus, which is in the name of Jesus. His name is Jesus. Jesus in translation to English is Jesus. I know a lot of Mexican people name their kids Jesus. I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. But I one day saw him kissing him very passionately Brenda's sister. Edward's sister. Way far down the aisle, far down. And I saw them kiss far down, and then I saw them separate, and then and I guess they were dating. And I remember that, and I think Edward or someone else told me, no, my sister, and Marco told me, he goes, no, yeah, Brenda's dating that guy over there. And I was like, oh, and I never knew this guy, Jesus or Jesus, very well at all. I just met him a number of times and smoked weed with him a couple of times. But I remember within a few days, or within a week, they told him, or I saw from the distance, or I was around the situation, they looked at me and said, and like they were hiding their homosexuality. So I don't know if this guy Jesus is a homosexual, and I think he is. So I think that's important because that involves Patricia. She was involved with Brenda, Edward's sister. So that's one of the most important information that I can say about regarding Patricia Cadena, Edward Rangel's sister, and Edward's twin. I don't know how that's associated. It's too late now. But I remember looking far down, and I was starting to see him kissing and making out. And I remember, I don't know if someone in the crowd, because there was like 3 or 4 other people around them, and they were all boys. And they were all, you know how like when you watch, you're a kid and you watch other 2 couples kiss. I think these other guys kind of like were gay too, but they're like, oh, you gotta look away, because they're having their sex moment or whatever. And that's kind of how they kind of betrayed. Not like it was a disgusting thing, but like, oh, they're dating. And so I think it's important for me to talk about, because I do remember that. I do remember that very well. And I remember like I said, very distinctively, someone looked over at me, because I was the only straight guy there and I had no idea. And they all looked over at me, and like for a moment, and they looked at him because they knew that I saw him kissing that Brenda girl, Edward's sister. And then looked over at me, and they said, and nodded his head like, And I remember Jesus looked, and he looked sort of embarrassed or shamed, and he kind of like, and he just kind of like sort of walked away, but not mad at me, but like, oh shit, you know, because I'm not sure how teenagers, homosexual behavior, how they function in secret, like to start making out with each other behind or in apartments, you know, when they're young or whatever it may be, or houses. But I just know that it was kept secluded for them. But I just happened to be sitting there and they didn't know. They saw me, but they didn't know I was like, oh, this guy's different. He doesn't live in this apartment, so he's also not gay. So I think it's important for me to talk about this particular situation. I really don't know what to make of it, other than to tell you this, so you're informed. But as far as it goes with Lakina Chin, if this person's a transgender, Richard Murphy and especially Jeremy Keene is a fucking betrayal like a motherfucker, and that's why. Let me tell you, that's why. That is why Jeremy showed up after being bitten by the dog, acted like he was trying to rescue me or help me. He was either trying to revive himself with what he had done because I fucked up, or I'm just a caring person now. Because he was very caring and very nice, but that's a very different situation. He helped lure me into that. He did. Because him and Nick Carrera also did. So if I find out and they know, they backstabbed the shit out of me really fucking bad. So I think it's important before, you know, anything else happens, before y'all can fix it. Whatever it is, it's always a losing embarrassment, disgrace. I mean, how does a fucking kid not understand this is a transgender? I didn't know because I'd seen this person, you know. In fact, one of the things that led me to believe that more were some of the other teachers. There was a cooking class teacher, and I don't know if this person was a transgender or not, but you can look it up on DeWitt Perry, my high school year, and find out if the cooking teacher in my 8th grade class was a transgender or not. Because I remember the teacher in there being sort of like, oh, he's a prominent male, he's a prominent guy, and he's already maturing. And that she knew about, I was kind of fiddling around with Lakina Chin. And I think it's important for me to talk about because the teacher was the one that influenced me. Now once, I don't think it was the last day. Was it the last day? It was one of the last days. Was it the last? I can't remember. No, yeah, I think it was the last day that I was at school. I think it was. It really was. But the reason I say this is Miss Hughes. Miss Hughes, when I was in 8th grade, was particularly one of my better teachers that I liked being around. And it was nice to me. And I remember being a kid around her, and she used to always shake her head like this, like, and she shook her head like this all the time, and she couldn't control it because she said that the reason she told the class is, the reason I can't stop shaking like this is not I'm having a stroke or sick. It's just that she was riding on a vacation on a river raft, on a river rapids, on a tube, and she fell off and hit her head on a rock. And she ended up having some sort of neurological damage. But she can think and do everything, but she couldn't stop from shaking her head, and she would always be like this. And the reason she could talk, and she'd be talking to you, and she'd be like, yeah, and be very calm, but she would be moving her head like that, and it was because she had hit her head on the vacation trip. But I remember that some of the teachers looked, that I was walked down the hall with Lakina Chin and flirting with her or whatnot. But when I saw Miss Hughes, you could tell when somebody tries to put the authority on something that they really don't know about, but they know that you don't know any better. And I remember her sitting at the desk and kind of looking, and she was very observative. And I remember her looking at me, and she was sort of enclosed. One of the things that I'm so analytical about when I'm looking at everything is I notice which teachers are sort of stuck in their reclusing environment, or the reclusive, because keep in mind the homosexuals and the transgenders control everything. And if you don't keep your mouth shut, I'm going to tell you which teachers are in charge. We're going to go to the principal and show the principal faggot. It's going to go to the principal superintendent of the fucking school district and fire your fucking ass. Faggots, transgenders, and lesbians run this motherfucker. And that's exactly how it fucking runs. 100%. Just like the music industry, just like when you go to work, you have all these faggots and that's all that's there, and they run everything. All the way to politics, to entertainment, and all work environments. Because the way that they group together and cultivate in gangs, that's why. And it never stopped. They're the reason dance music exists. They're the reason so much of so many things other exist. Fashion designing, makeup artists, fashion designers that do architectural home designing. That's all gays. But understanding that I remember she never talked to anyone, and I knew there were faggots. Sullivan was a faggot that I remember sort of scaring me or punking me when I was walking in the hall when he saw me walking with Richard. And this is the way he enforces his faggots. He still works over there. He's been working for 25 fucking years or some shit, or 30 years. Coach Burns, same thing. He's another homosexual, and I talked about this. And this is when I talked about I was in Coach Burns' class in seventh grade. And in seventh grade, and his class in seventh grade is the same class as Miss Hughes' class because they changed the classes. And then in eighth grade, when I was in eighth grade, they made his class into her class. But I remember being in seventh grade in Coach Burns' class. He was gay too, and he had a Mexican wife with black hair. Supposedly, he had a picture of her on his desk. And I talked about. He goes and says, "I'm Michael Jackson." I go, "My name is Michael." And he's doing the investigation for the dead little girl. And he said he was a big Christian. And then he started defending Sarah. He goes, "Don't worry, I'll pay for it, hell, your wife." And it was Sarah he was defending. They thought I knew anything about this, and I didn't. And this is where they said they pointed out Armando in the class, and they separated, and he just pointed over at Armando and looked at me. So I wanted to say something about this. Because I think it's important to validate what's happening. And as far as Miss Hughes, I remember her being at her desk, and she kind of looked at me like, "Hector," and did something like that at her desk. But you could tell that she just stuck to her job. She stays very quiet and be careful. Remember, not to mess with them. And I'm just here to be a teacher. She was a good teacher. She really was. She was a good teacher. I know she's not alive anymore, but I know she was an emotional, good person. I could tell you something. One time that happened. I was in seventh grade. I didn't have Miss Hughes. A lot of people didn't like Miss Hughes for some reason. Some people did. And I remember Robert Zarate one day standing behind her, and he was such a nuisance sometimes, doing silly things to get people's attention, crazy things that people get his attention. And I remember he looks at her, and I don't know why he did this, and he didn't know why he did this. Sometimes he didn't know why he did it. And he goes and he looks at her, and he behind her, he was like taunting her, right? And I looked over him. I didn't say anything. I just kind of smirked, like, I didn't say anything or laugh. And the teacher turned around and saw him, and then she goes, "Robert, I want you in my class now." And Robert Zarate told me. He said it was after school, and she started crying in class to Robert, saying, "I had a really bad accident. It's not my fault that I'm shaking like this in my head, and I had an accident." And she started crying to him. And then Robert left school that day, and the next day, Robert told me, "Yeah, she put me in her class, man. She started crying, man." And he felt bad. He felt bad about it. I could tell he felt bad about it. He goes, "Yeah, she started crying, man. She said that she had an accident. It wasn't her fault that she could shake her head like that." So I think it's important for me to talk about, because I didn't know who she was. I saw her occasionally in seventh grade, but it wasn't until eighth grade that she taught seventh grade to now teaching eighth grade. And I did really well in her class. She had language arts reading class, and Um, I remember, like I said, she particularly kind of favored me a little bit and liked me. And she was the teacher that I think I remember turning in the paper that we were going to go see the Auschwitz survivor. When I went to go to Auschwitz, Birkenau, like year and a half ago, well, I actually met a real survivor but he wasn't from Auschwitz, I'm sorry. He wasn't from Auschwitz, but he was one of the other Holocaust camps, one of the other bad ones, like one of the upscale, other real bad ones. It wasn't Auschwitz. His family got killed over there, but he got sent to like one of the other ones that were just like a torture camp. And it was just one of the other worst, like there was like the second or third worst of Holocaust camps. And I can't remember which one the name of it was, but he was one of the bad ones, and real bad ones. Well, we had a piece of paper to get our parents to sign. It was actually her. She actually was the one that we turned it into. And then in 8th grade is when I saw the Holocaust survivor talking about tattoos he had, and he said the horrors of what he saw in real life, what human beings did. And the people in death and suffering like nothing, like just worthless human beings. And the Nazi soldiers laughing and all this other stuff that happened. And he talked about, and he said, I need to speak of the truth of what happened because these people are no longer alive, about what these people did. And I'm here to speak about what for their lives and for mine, and to not repeat history, because this was truly hell and the worst of the worst you can imagine. You know, babies being slammed up against poles and their heads exploding, you know, an infant crying like that and he shuts a baby up like that, babies being thrown off balconies, being exploded for target practice for the Nazi Germans. But I think it's important for me to talk about because when I was in her class, I never had any problems ever with her. She was very nice, very polite, very soft-spoken, very lightly soft-spoken. But I say this that I think it's important. But I remember she saw me and Lakina talking, and I remember like the second or third visit in her class, whatever schedule, this is toward the end of the year, she goes, Hector, and did something at her desk, and there really wasn't a particular, and I knew she had something to do with Lakina or something like that. I had a hunch or something that had to do with that, because I didn't ever have personal conversations with her. I talked to her here and now, and they always tend to be pleasant, but it was always quick talk, very few words here and there, and that's it, you know. And I could just tell by them looking at me whether I was enjoyed in their company, and I, you know, seemed to enjoy their company. So, I think it's important. I don't know if Lakina is, because if Lakina turns out to be a transgender and there's this Asian Cambodian, she had a brother. Let me tell you, she had a younger brother. And I remember her brother, when I first started talking to Lakina over the phone, he was in 6th grade, and I remember walking, and he was a big kid. He was a big kid for a 6th grader. And I remember him looking at me, like always deterring me away from her. And like looking at me, and he saw me, he goes, looking at me and saw me and was like, "You trying to talk to my sister, man? You trying to talk about my sister?" And he had sort of a little bit deep voice. He was a kind of chunky kid. And he looked at me kind of like, "What are you doing?" Like, but it was like, he had a sense of humor when he did it, but he was kind of serious, so he used humor to be serious with things. And Lakina, to my understanding, if I remember correctly, there used to, in 6th grade, I don't know where this little kid came from. If I remember, he was this little tiny Asian kid. I'm talking about, this little kid was like the height of like, he was like 4'1", like almost, he wasn't a midget, he was just he looked like a cute little fucking Buddhist little monk kid. And he was really active. He was a kid of our age. He was just a really short, skinny kid, but very active. And full of active, could run, could juke very well, but just really tiny. He was the tiniest kid in the entire school. And he was like way below average of height. Like he was little tiny kid. and it was either Lakina's Chin, it was either Lakina's Chin's brother or half brother or relative. But I remember seeing them and running around. He looked like a Buddhist monk kind of, but I don't know if I remember. I didn't see him at that house, and I didn't see her brother that day, and I didn't see that little kid either. In fact, the house is completely empty. But I think I may have, because I've only saw her maybe once. Only saw her once. So, I mean, the kid, her brother once, and just kind of looked at me like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing, man? And he would always say that. So, I don't know if it's because there were other boys going to that house, but I will tell you this. There is no doubts in my mind that 100%, there's no doubts in my mind. There's no confusion. That girl, Claudia, who showed up and I didn't know, her vibes and everything was there to protect me. And it was not like I like you instead of for me. It was like protecting me. There was no confusion and I didn't understand. I was like, and I looked at her like, because I don't know Lakina's not a transgender. And I'm looking at this girl and I'm like, hey, this girl's pretty. And I'm thinking, like, I was like, this girl's pretty. And she had all brand new white jeans, tight white jeans, and like a long sleeve, I think, shirt, pretty shirt or something like that. And she only showed up because she saw that I walked in that house. So if you can do your research and if it matters, I don't know, because they showed up with the girl that looked bikini on the bus. But regardless of everything, of the disgrace of anything that happened, Jeremy Keene and Richard Murphy are all responsible, and Cisco knew all about that as well. They never told me, and so did John Vasili. The primary people, all of them, because I was around them, hanging out, going playing video games all the time. Richard Murphy, Nick Carrera, and especially Jeremy and Cisco, because I talked about Cisco with Lakina. I mean, I talked about Lakina to Cisco. So this is why there's more misunderstanding that it bothers me as well, to whoever got what, and you're putting all this family together because all you're making me is a garbage can, because I never did anything to these people, and I never did anything. And the same thing with Sarah Cooper and Ken, but that is a very personal way, but in a very different personal way. I don't know really what to say. To be fooled and tongue down an Asian girl like that. I mean, a man, and I didn't know. I mean, I remember talking to Aaron Mendoza, and he was like, yeah, Lakina has a fine pair of legs, man. I don't know who else knew she was a transgender. And I think Edward Rangel, not Edward Rangel, Eder, who used to be really good friends with Armando. I used to see that guy with this girl everywhere I went. Abby, I don't know if she was a female or not. And I think she was. But it doesn't change the fact that if that turns out to be Lakina Chin's a transgender, it was never going to change the fact of what Jeremy and Richard did and how they behaved. Never. You don't understand how petrifying, especially Jeremy, because I was very much led on to them by their conversation. Very much so. Well, there you go. My mother is also fucking a gay man who's, being straight for the moment, huh? We're just trashing my mother's life and kids, whatever they want for the gays.